I'm your host, Dennis Tubbergen, and we have a terrific show lined up for you this week. Regular guest on the Everything Financial Radio Show, Mr. Ian Gordon, will be back this week. Ian will talk to us about the topics of gold, paper money, and the history of fiat currency. If that's a new term to you, fiat currency simply means money not backed by anything tangible. Most commonly, one would think of gold in that context. So we'll get Ian's take on today's economic climate and a couple of failed fiat currency systems that have some interesting parallels with where we're going today. I know you're going to find that conversation to be fascinating. Also on today's show, in our big government files, we're going to talk about eating science projects. Remember that 10th grade science project you did? Would you eat the science project? Well, the government may indeed be having people do that very same thing. We'll explain. Also, Spain's economic mess, could it affect us? Well, a prominent economist this past week said that it could. And Dallas Federal Reserve President Mr. Richard Fisher came out this week and said, we need to punish big banks. We'll talk about that. Illinois, a state that certainly is in a very difficult state financially, finds that their borrowing costs are rising, not unlike what's going on in Spain and Italy, the state of Illinois experiencing the same thing. And finally, Bill Gross this past week, manager of one of the world's largest bond funds, said another credit rating downgrade is likely for the U.S. government. So we'll talk about all that on today's show, as well as how it affects you and your money. Quick reminder, if you have not attended one of our discovery groups, I'd like to invite you to go to personallegacyseminars.com. That's personallegacyseminars.com and get more information. We will be out at the Centennial Country Club in Grand Rapids on Thursday, May 10th. You can click on the link there for more information. If you have not attended a discovery group in the last few months, you are welcome to register to attend. We will talk about at the discovery group why we believe the current economic winter season in which we find ourselves was entirely predictable. We'll be talking in just a moment with Ian Gordon about that. We'll tell you what we think lies ahead, and we'll tell you what we think it may mean for you and your family. We'll also talk about why we believe that most of the economic growth of the past 30 years has been really an illusion. We'll explain why that is. We'll present facts and data, and we'll present what we believe the consequences might be for you and your money. Also, many changes in laws and regulations find that many people are overpaying on taxes and other financial expenses. We'll point that out as well. More information available, again, online at personallegacyseminars.com. That's personallegacyseminars.com.
I am privileged once again to have with me on the Everything Financial Radio Show Mr. Ian Gordon. Ian is the founder of the Longwave Group. His work is very interesting. I've followed him very closely for several years now. Would advise that you do the same. And Ian, great to have you back on the Everything Financial Radio Show. Thanks for joining us.
Well, I'm happy to be back.
Ian, last time you were on the show, we talked about Europe. Since that time, the European Central Bank has gotten a lot more active, but yet the problems don't seem to be going away, obviously. Spain now is making headlines. Greece is now page 3 news, but their debt there is greater than when the bailout packages started. So give us your take as to what the policy response is. What are the policymakers that are trying to do, and then what's the likely outcome in your opinion?
Well, they're doing what has always been done if you go back into history. They're trying to save a paper money system by creating even more of it. And it isn't going to work. It never has worked. In my view, the paper money system is collapsing worldwide, and these are desperate acts by the central banks trying to prop up a system that is essentially overwhelmed by debt.
Ian, when you say that there's never been I don't mean to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, there's never been a paper money system that has survived. Can you give the listeners maybe an historical example or two?
Well, I think the two closest examples in history are actually both French examples, as the John Laws, who was a Scotsman that convinced the French ruler in the early 1700s that the way out of the debt problem that the French government was facing was to go on a paper money system. And typically, once you get on those paper money systems, all discipline gets lost, and the printing presses just rev up and create even more and more paper. And coupled with that paper money scheme in the John Law's period was a huge, basically a massive stock scheme based on the Mississippi provinces that the French owned in the United States. And that whole thing eventually collapsed, and the paper money scheme completely collapsed, and the stock market essentially didn't actually go to zero, but almost went to zero in Paris. And the French were forced to return to a specie form of payment, at this time gold. So that was one example. The second example was again in France, was during the French Revolution. The revolutionaries started to print paper money called assignats, and of course discipline was lost. They tried to couple it to the paper to church lands, and eventually they printed so much of it that system too collapsed. And Napoleon actually seized power in France from the revolutionaries and returned France to a dual precious money system based on gold and silver. So, and what happens as the paper money systems start to collapse is that there's the printing presses get revved up, ever larger quantities of paper are created, and that's really what we're seeing right now, is the same sort of solution to a paper money problem is just to create even more of it. And of course paper money is debt money, so effectively we're creating even more and more debt. What's happening worldwide is that the governments are trying to take the debt that's on the bank's books and basically pass it on to the taxpayers, and so it's the sovereign debt that's increasing it very rapidly now, and eventually, I don't see any solution except that effectively the world will return to a money system that's backed by precious metals.
Ian, you mentioned that this seems to be something going on worldwide. I read a statistic recently that I believe since 2006, although I could be wrong in the year, the 6 largest central banks of the world have expanded their balance sheets to the tune of about $8 trillion U.S. So that's certainly evidence of money printing. Is there any country around the world where there's a currency safe haven, or a currency that's maybe better than another?
Well, no, I don't really think there is, because they're all based on paper. And, I'm pretty sure that eventually, we're going to see one country sort of step forward and say, this currency is now backed by, our currency is now backed by precious metals, and probably backed by gold. And I suspect that's going to happen with China. China has been accumulating gold at a rapid pace, and isn't that forthright in telling us how much gold she has, and I'm sure that eventually the renminbi the Chinese are going to say the renminbi is now a gold-backed currency, which effectively will force the world into line behind China.
So, Ian, that would certainly be viewed maybe by some countries around the world that are running printing presses as maybe even an act of war. Certainly it's not something that many countries would look upon very kindly. Do you have any opinions as to how that might play out in the 2 minutes or so we have left in this segment?
Well, again, we always go back in history and use history as the sort of example, to sort of try to get up where we are effective to where we were, and we're very convinced that we're going through the same kind of money collapse that occurred in the 1930s. And of course, that was in the last Kondratiev winter season. And between 1931 and 33, the whole money system collapsed. At that time, it was based on gold, and the countries wanted to start to print money to get out of the depression. And so they went off gold and went on to paper. Now, what we have is the system is collapsing. The paper money systems are collapsing. And what happened was, through that sort of collapse in the Depression, we did go, there was the Second World War sort of began because of the state, particularly in Germany, of the financial system, because Germany had huge reparations following the First World War imposed on her. So I don't think there will be a war immediately, but I suspect that we're going to go through some huge upheaval, a major worldwide depression, and probably coming out of that, something akin to the Second World War.
Ian, as usual, your timing is great. We will continue chatting with Mr. Ian Gordon of the Longwave Group when Everything Financial Radio returns. Stay with us.